indicators are deceptively difficult to do and to get right. They're not the kind of thing you do at 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. You need a lot more time for that. You need some expertise in doing that. So you have to allow time and resources for this, and then identify right at the beginning, brainstorm, what are some potential ways in which these indicators can be missed, and to see if you can twig them in such a way to minimize them, or at least identify what to look out for. And always pre-test again, revise, pre-test again. And Campbell's law holds that any indicator, if there's going to be consequences attached to it, it's going to be corrected over time. So what you want to do is you want to change indicators, don't keep them constant, which has some problems with consistency, but then the program's changing, there are problems with that as well. Yes?
Question in that regard.
Okay.
You probably know these RACER criteria for indicators.
Pardon?
RACER indicator and criteria that are promoted by the EU, certainly.
Oh, yes.
That the objectives should be SMART and the indicators should be RACER.
Yes.
Relevant, acceptable, or accepted,
Yes.
something else, credible,
Yes.
and easy to collect and reliable.
Yes.
Would that be any help in this process of revising and defining and revising these indicators?
I think it's a shame that the EU is getting into this 10 years after the problems with indicators have been identified. And, the Commission, that's my reaction. They've into the EU cohesion policy, which is reach of development grants to promote equality. Are now building indicators with conditions attached, to some extent, to minor extent, but based upon such broad indicators, the number of people trained, the number of people in employment. They're in the findings. The number of people trained can include anything from someone who goes to a half-a-day workshop and slips in the door and slips out, or someone who goes to a 6-month really intensive training program where they really learns something. And someone in employment isn't defined very carefully. They're combined with self-employment, which someone can quote-unquote self-employed and earn no income at all, or have their expenses for any business exceed those of any revenues. Which again include part-time work, it can include good jobs you're going to lead to something, it could include abusive jobs, and it's really subject to manipulation. So, and if you're going to have raise your indicators, it means you're going to be on outputs, not going to be on outcomes. Because you can't do that, you can't control them. So I see that as negative, and live with that. And let's talk about that. So you're going to use immediately you notice some problems. What are some basic strategies? I mentioned this first. You pick indicators which aren't going to do any harm. And try to make them useful and meaningful at the grassroots so people are going to do this. And indicators can be helpful. It's nice to have 3 things or 5 things which give you a sense of how things are coming along. And in that sense, they're fine. The problem is when you use them inappropriately for evaluation. So to a large extent, the problem is what you do with them, not that you're collecting them necessarily. When it becomes a problem if you put all your resources into that and you assume that means evaluation, so you don't do evaluation, but you're not being strategic by getting into indicators. You're looking at how your implementation is coming along. Yes? Sorry.
Going back to the indicators,
Yes?
you said review, pretest, review, and revision.
Yes?
So when do you stop reversing in case you are using maybe a 5-year plan or a 4-year plan? What happens? When do you stop the revisions?
I'd say never. I mean, you do pre-testing, testing before you do that, and then at various points throughout, say, 5 years, after 6 months or after a year, take a look at them and see how they're working out. And if there's some issues or problems with them, you might want to review them or revise them at that point. Take another look again a year later. longer an indicator is in place, the more likely it's to be corrupted. Also, for 5 years, programs change, the context changes, an indicator which may have made sense at one point, 5 years later probably doesn't. Maybe there's some indicators which will remain constant over time, but maybe they need to be interpreted in a different way. You need to collect some other information to make them more meaningful.
So what will be the validity of your indicators?
What do we, what?
How long will they be valid before you revise them?
Depends. I mean, it might not be valid at all, if, given some of the problems we showed with indicators about how they could be misused. But if you look at them, how long would it be valid? I don't think I or anyone can give you an overall answer to that. It really depends. But assume that if there's consequences attached to them, that they will be corrupted. So, other thing you can do is have multiple indicators, some strangulation, put all your eggs in one basket. And sometimes some process evaluation can be very helpful in looking at how these things are done. I mean, I talked about the problem earlier about, how busy workers, don't necessarily put a lot of effort into accuracy of the information they record. And once I had a project where, this was in Canada, and there was a sensitive program politically which involved something to do with child support or something, which involved people going to courthouses to get some sort of assistance. And there was concern this could have been politically sensitive, so they wanted to keep track of it. So they asked each courthouse to send in weekly some statistics about various sorts of things. And after a while, I suspected maybe there's something funny about these, so they had me investigate. What I did is, which no one had done before, is I actually went to some of the people who were collecting these statistics in various localities. And each place would sit down with them, and they would show me how each of the questions which they were asked to answer were impossible to answer because the data wasn't there, because the question made no sense, or different places they would interpret. It seemed like a simple answer: was there legal counsel? Well, they didn't know what this media interpreted one way in one place, another way in another place, and these data were completely meaningless. I mean, remember in a couple places that they would go through systematically telling me why they couldn't provide this information to each of these questions. I say, well, yeah, but you send these forms in every week, don't you? Yes. But what do you put down? Well, we put down something which makes sense. Well, I mean, this is almost inevitable if people don't know what to do with it. So, you not only want to test these things out before, test them with the people who are actually going to be using them. Let them tell you whether it makes sense or not. Observe how they do it, but also check again what's actually happening with these things in practice. And so, good process evaluation doesn't have to be very extensive. You just with the feel of the people who are collecting this data, writing it down, recording it, see what actually happens, what kind of issues occur. And if you do this, you don't have to do it everywhere, but a few places, can give you a sense of how things are going. And if you do this on an ongoing basis every few months, it'll give you a sense of restoring integrity or not for these. Does that help?
Yeah.
Again, these are difficult questions, and if you want a simple answer, only one to give you is 42. Now, if you link indicators to budget allocations, to rewards, of course they're going to be corrupted. It's almost inevitable. And the only question is, why wouldn't they be? So avoid that if you possibly can, or if they are, be prepared to expect this and look for it. And use them when they make sense. In some cases, they do make sense. Standardized programs with the current products and services, they can make a lot of sense. You can follow what's going on. But, and this is, Pollock, I think, was the first president of EES, portfolio, he pointed this out. Henry Mintzberg is arguably the biggest guru on strategy for management in the private sector. You know, for established programs with a basis for identifying meaningful indicators and targets, you can use them. But for new program, where you have no idea what makes a meaningful indicator and target, you can't really use your first period of time to establish these, test various things. You can try different indicators and then validate them, see which ones make sense, which do not. We're going back to indicators being distorted. You know, here's something from the Philippines where teachers were ordering their own pupils to cheat. And, you know, one parent got upset because her son was ordered by the teacher to let other students copy his answers to all that. And, you know, there are enormous pressures to, you know, so everyone passes these national tests, so everyone looks good, you know, for the good of the school, to get more money for the school. So there's incredible pressures to do this. And so of course there's going to be pressures to cheat or to engage in low displacement or to fudge the numbers or game things in some way. So you expect this and try not to link it that way and to use different measures for the non-appropriate for tangible individual services like, you know, health services and the like, or for non-tangible ideal services like providing policy advice within government or whatever, because they don't apply themselves to this. Now again, use indicators as indicators. Now, I mean, an indicator like, you know, if you go to a doctor and a doctor takes your blood pressure, and if your blood pressure is normal, that's an indicator that, you know, maybe you're okay, but you could still be dying from something else, maybe perfect blood pressure, or there could be reasons why you have an elevated blood pressure, even though there's nothing wrong with you. So it's only one indicator, a little glimpse of something. It doesn't give you a whole answer. So use them is this way, you know, as a window rather than as a reality in itself, and begin to raise questions rather than provide the answer. You know, so what you do is, you know, use them at different levels when they make sense, when they can be reliable, when they can be validated. When you can't do this, don't do so. And, you know, as questions, then you go and you check them out. And sometimes a couple phone calls or queries will explain why things seem to be out of whack. And we have different similar programs in different settings. You collect data on a monthly or weekly basis or whatever, a quarterly basis. And things seem to be out of whack in one place. Why is this? And maybe there's a good reason. There's a particular health problem in that area or whatever, but maybe there isn't. But you know, sometimes a phone call answers you that. Other times you need to commission an evaluation to discover what's really going on. So it can be very, very useful in that sense. And again, try, and this gets tricky, you're trying to focus on real results, getting more towards outcomes rather than activities, busyness. And the other thing, this again is what you can do with a statistician who wants numbers, is to provide performance information rather than performance data. And what this means combining all sorts of different data, statistical data, different kinds of numbers, and tell the story using the numbers, using other sorts of data, as well as you're not just providing the raw data, you're actually providing real information. And again, performance management, PM, RBM is supposed to stand for results-based management, but it gets corrupted by measurement, which is not the same thing as management. Measurement is a tool for management, but management involves a lot of other things. And this gets beyond our own brief as evaluators, but we should bear this in mind. And the managers have to provide leadership, motivation, dealing with many different constituency groups. And measurement is only one aspect of the input which they need to do to be good managers. Managers too close and stick of the data is gonna miss the larger plot of what a manager really should do, and to be really strategic, look at the larger questions, because usually, it's a paradox of life. The less important something is, the easier it is to be specific about it, and you put hard data for it, the more important something is, the vaguer the answer is going to be. So you want to guard against that kind of misuse. And they say periodically, review the overall picture, ask yourself, did the data make sense, what's coming in place, coming back? What are some questions arising, and check them. Other thing, I'm not sure I have it here, is that something I hear a lot of, to make the data more meaningful, provide feedback to the people who supply it. It used to be people would send them the numbers, and I think it was going to garbage can or something, rather than send it electronically, and wonder if anyone even opens the file. It's rare to get feedback, even acknowledgement. Very easy to say, give us acknowledgement, say thank you for the report, we'll look at it. If you do a bit more and show what you do with this information, if you consolidate it with data from elsewhere, and then show it to people, show them how you're actually using this data, then it helps, there still might be cynicism, but at least provide some indication that you're doing something with this data they're providing, and maybe there's some point to it. Otherwise, people will, and you wonder what it really makes. And again, a good evaluation strategy should use multiple methods, data from all sources. Performance indicators can be one source of data, one important source, but not the only source. So you want to mix up your methods together, your sources of data. And, I've touched upon a lot of these things before. Look at subgroup differences. You report your statistics level details, the breakdowns, and rarely some of them will be consistent with some another. Whereas the headline data may not make any sense, and if you present that, then make sure you, like the example I gave you, 60% improvement, did that include all females or no females who are doing any better if you have a 60-40 breakdown distribution? This isn't unusual. Very often some people, in most of the cases, actually some people do very well and some people do lousy and other people are in between. So you really want to really look at this to really understand what's happening, because your reading scores don't really have a lot of meaning. So provide as many breakdowns as you possibly can, and it gives a much larger picture and a more complex picture, and will help your statistician and finance department maybe ask you, well, what does this really mean? In that case, you're writing with your performance description, your performance information, on what it means. Also, one way of using indicators I've heard, is, steering by the stars, it indicates direction. You're never going to reach there, it lets you know when you're moving in the right direction or not, and that can be very, very helpful. As opposed to assessing performance, so indicators can be used for different purposes and in different ways. And, again, don't set up a program for failure. If you can see how they're going to be misused, try to come up with some other indicators or a range of indicators to cover the road work or the groundwork, or some complementary evaluation as well, which could look at some of the larger questions, and particularly some of the more strategic questions. But like, if you have outcome or impact indicators like the MDGs, they could tell you whether the needs are still there, whether it's getting better or not. It won't tell you whether your initiative is having much effect on it, because they're usually much too far away, but it does give you a frame of reference. And this is perhaps an example of the Lisbon agenda, which, for the EU board, didn't come anywhere close to it. You really need to look at whether you break things down if you're really making any kind of progress, and to identify some specific questions. How do we know whether we're making any progress towards the overall strategy, and what else know whether we're going there or not. So to ask the right kind of strategic questions, and not just the questions which are going to attach indicators to them. You know, I think I've talked about some of these other things. They're never right the first time, and the situation's always changing, so you need to keep your indicators dynamic. And there are they useful? Do they really help management indicate whether you're making progress or not, which is where they can be invaluable. You know, give a snapshot so you have a sense of whether things are moving according to plan or not, and you do need to know that. But it doesn't tell you whether a plan is the right plan or not, and that's your strategic question. You still have to ask that, you have to ask that using evaluation. So be clear what monitoring will tell you and what it can tell you. So that gets us into, well, and again, from a reporting perspective, I've touched upon this, rather than give the minimum amount of information requested, give more information, because you provide different aspects of it. And performance story actually comes out from the Canadian Office of the Auditor General in Canada, so it's not from a soft story. And what you do is you use the data you get from indicators or other sources, and you describe in prose format, it can be very brief, what this tells you about what you know about the performance, what it doesn't tell you about it, what the questions are remaining. And rather than just a list of numbers, you actually put it in context and put some meaning on it. And it's okay to say there's some things we don't know about, there's some questions, and that can lead to, well, a contribution analysis approach I'll tell you about in a moment. But you're open and honest about what does happen, what you can claim, and what else you need to look at, and how you can do this, you know, just to say some things which are needed we don't know about, without saying anything about what you're going to do about it. Does the beg the question, you can say, well, we need to develop some more indicators for these things, and these more strategic questions, we really need evaluation, and as soon as we get the money together, we'll look at that. And always identify the limitations of any data you use and qualify like anything. Point out the dangers of misuse, particularly to people who are likely to misuse it in such a way that it's not a minor little detail and footnote, but it's up in front, it's not to, you know, just in bold letters before you present the data. Say these are subject to some limitations, beware. Afterwards, say interpret these with caution, so that they don't miss it, which is easy enough to read. Now, how do you use monitoring and evaluation in combination? And that's what I said earlier, and they can be complementary. I mean, ongoing monitoring, you can, at the very least, identify questions and issues which later you can engage in in-depth evaluation. It won't address strategic questions, but it can give some hints about some strategic questions you should be asking. It will provide data which you can use for evaluation, baseline data, other forms of data. And for impact evaluation, it can be used to describe the nature of the intervention itself, which is an essential part of impact evaluation. Evaluation, in turn, can identify what could be monitored on an ongoing basis in the future. So they can be complementary in that sense, can support one another, and more in combination. You know, again, you can be strategic in deciding what you want to do. You know, take a multiple method approach, and I'm repeating myself, but I think it's worth doing. It's not that you do one versus the other. You use everything. Develop a strategy. Your theory of change can help develop this and can indicate what kind of things you can monitor. Usually the front end of the results chain, or other things you can, or some of the larger questions, some of the assumptions, which you need evaluation. And it can tell you at what points in time along the trajectory of the program it's appropriate to do these sorts of things. see each one as appropriate. You know, some form of monitoring can be appropriate for some questions at certain stages, other cases vary as far as evaluation. I don't use monitoring when evaluation is more appropriate than attendance evaluation, or vice versa. And you also look at the costs involved, because I mean there are costs, and you know, monitoring usually, but not always, is less costly and it's quicker because you can make use of existing data, use your existing staff collected. But then there's an opportunity cost for staff doing the sort of thing, and there's cost for analysis, and there is a cost to these indicators rightly. So it isn't necessarily quicker. But the costs tend to be hidden, because it's hidden in staff time, which isn't devoted to other things. Now, again, I think we've talked about most of these things. You know, monitoring to give you part of the what is going on, and the evaluation can expand upon the why and so what kind of questions. And you start with the questions. If you want to be strategic questions, and use strategic methods, and the methods which are best adapted to that question, not just which is easier to measure. And again, I've highlighted this point before, but you know, you want the minimum amount of information that's needed to address the right questions, which will actually be used, as opposed to be like a researcher and try to overload the data just for its own sake. Now, contribution analysis. Again, this comes from John Main, who was then a Canadian officer in Auditor General. The article is entitled, and I gave you the reference there, is using performance measures sensibly, or something like that. And first, you develop the results chain, the theory of change, and you assess the existing evidence you have, which will probably come from the indicators, and assemble, you know, what are the alternative explanations? Earlier I talked about viable, plausible explanations. What else could possibly explain the reason for the data other than this program having worked or not? And so you anticipate, articulate these alternative explanations, indicate what data you can have which can rule them out or not. And based upon this, you pull together a performance story, which is a prose story, but it can use numbers to say what you can say and qualify them and provide limitations. You're being responsive, which always indicate limitations. What you can say, and then it's an iterative process. So then, based upon this, you go seek out additional evidence, maybe more indicators or more, maybe evaluation, maybe data from a different source based upon what you can identify, and revise and strengthen the performance story. So this is, there should be lots and lots of attention in evaluation and development. And again, it goes back to an acknowledgement that you can't really prove anything in a one-on-one relationship where you have multiple factors intervening, but you can look for contribution where there's multiple factors involved.
I'm assuming that this particular exercise or developing the project, because if you're the evaluator and you are doing this of a project that's already underway, the job should be done already in the theory of change. So you might be using this to test what there is already, but you should not be developing this in a project that's already underway.
Well, yes and no. I mean, one hand you're right, but most of the people here are in a position where you could, at the very least, advocate to build in some evaluation considerations into the design of programs and projects. At minimum, some monitoring information, preferably some work and some theory of change, collecting some baseline data. And if a program doesn't do that, it's not responsible. If you that's a message you need to start getting through to your organization. And then, you just don't wanna hit it that way, you say, and here's how I can help you. Which may sound like extra work for you, but it'll make things a lot easier at the other end. And people will start seeing the value of this. When people are engaged in articulating the theory of change, their environment finds it very useful to them. There are various models which can be used for this. There's one used in ILO called SPIF, the Strategic Program Impact Framework, which is basically theory of change, but it's portrayed as a planning tool. Now, we talk about evaluation after something's been around, but if you wait 5 years and you don't do any evaluation until then, again, you're derelict. Or someone's derelict and not having looked at it beforehand. So, it may be partly retrospective, but you, again, engage others in seeing how far you can go, see where things are at. In that case, you may be at this stage over here, you already have, you look at the evidence which there is, maybe you hadn't really thought this through, you have to develop after part of the way along a theory of change, but see what it tells you. Where are you at? What are some of the gaps? Maybe there's some gaps in the theory of change, you have to go back and redo it. So don't wait until the end, and I see evaluators falling into that trap. I mean, I see some evaluation units knowing they've been asked to evaluate this policy 3 years down the road, and they do nothing until 2.5 years later, and they say, there's no baseline data. Well, of course there isn't. Why don't you do something when you knew you were supposed to be doing it earlier? Now, in some cases you're stuck with that, but the more you can anticipate, the more meaningful it's going to be. Does that make sense? If we just do ex post evaluations, we don't give any thought to evaluation until the very end, you're stuck because you're based upon existing data. Well, much of it which won't be there, and there's some techniques you can use, but it does limit the quality and the integrity of what you come up with. And that is the most common mode of evaluation now. And in that case, you still want to be strategic. You still want to ask the large questions and look at what the evidence tells you. And collect some other data even after the last stage. And you do this again by asking the right kind of questions, of the various stakeholders. The big questions about what value this program had, and think about alternatives approaches. And if it hasn't worked well, again, is it because the way it was implemented, or maybe some logical flaws in what it's doing? How is it related with other things? Is there coordination across different kinds of activities? And I think there is some movement in this development where, partly due to Paris Declaration, Quad Accord reaction, and Busan, donors are increasingly recognizing there's supposed to be doing some alignment, some recognition that with many things happening all at once, you can't assume that your activity you're supporting is happening, only one happening in isolation. So there's some recognition of this, but it's still imperfect. There's still a tendency to wait towards the end and then say it's hard to evaluate these whatever the baseline data. So let's try to anticipate this, and that's again another way of being strategic, but again you're asking the right kind of questions, and all you can do is after the fact, ask this after the fact, and you do that using the best data you have available. So what kind of questions does this raise now? So I think, Form A. Again, going back to this before, one way of using information is to press the magic button, and sorry, things aren't quite that simple. Things don't work that way. So I think before we conclude, it's now just about 5 o'clock. what, I'd like to see where we stand and see what other questions you have, and just spend some time dealing with them. The one question we had, the theme is, how could we promote greater use of M&E? And how have we done in that? You have some ideas you can think of? What I'm gonna ask you to do in a moment is to, in your table, is to identify at least any remaining questions you have which you'd like us to still talk about. And also identify at least one takeaway, one thing you can take away from today back to when you go back to your home setting. It could be something I said, it could be something you read, it could be something you just talked about with someone else. So why don't we take a few minutes and do that, okay?